Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to What If Deku Was the Avatar Part 2. Last time on the What If, Izuku learned he was able to bend fire at an early age, and he believed for a long time that that was his only power. But after being attacked by a villain made out of sludge, he learned that there was more to his power than he originally thought, because apparently he has a defense mechanism that activates when he is about to die, and when he woke up he found that he was able to bend the earth around him, and he learned to master this to some extent by learning from the molds in the area, and he was able to pass the UA entrance exam, and he and Ochako just won the Heroes vs. Villains exercise against Ida and Box. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it's the day after the exercise, and when class started, Aizawa walked into the room, and he announced it was time for them to decide who will be their class rep and deputy rep. And when he announced this, everyone in the class started to shout, saying that they should be chosen. And after a couple of minutes, Ida stands up and he says that they should do a vote to see who should be the reps. And when he said this, everyone agreed. And when the voting was done, Izuku was chosen to be the class rep, and Momo was chosen to be the deputy rep. So now we skip to lunch. And while Izuku, Ochako, and Ida were eating, Ochako asked about Ida's family. And it's there that the two learned that Ida comes from a family of pro heroes, and his brother is a pro hero in Genium. But before he was able to explain more, alarms in the cafeteria began to ring. And when they did, all the upperclassmen began to get out of their seats, and they ran to the exit as fast as they could. And confused about what was going on, the three tried to get the attention of an upperclassman, and after a couple of minutes they were able to get the attention of a senior, who tells them that the defenses must have been bypassed, and they need to get out just in case it's an attack. So the three then ran to the exit, but before they got in, they noticed that the hallway was completely filled, and before they were able to find another way out, they get pushed in. And while they were in the hallway, the crowd kept pushing and shoving, and after some time, Ida was pushed against one of the glass walls, and when he looked out, he saw President Mike and Aizawa talking to news reporters. So he then got Chako's attention, and he told her to make him float, and when she was able to make him float, he used his engine to fly on top of an exit sign, and he shouted for the hallway's attention, and when he gets it, he tells them that there aren't any villains. And when he says this, the hallway began to calm down, and they were able to get out easily. So now we skip a couple of minutes, and when everyone was able to make it back to Class 1A, Izuku announced that he will step down and give his title to Ida, since he just showed he is more qualified than he is. He then asked Ida if he was willing to take his role, and Ida after a couple of seconds nodded. So now we skip a couple of days, and when class started, Aizawa announced that they will be going on a field trip, so he told them to put on their hero costume and get onto the bus that was waiting for them. And Izuku was able to wear his hero costume since only his sleeves were burned, so they were easier to repair. So now we skip to when Class 1A gets to the USJ, and when they got there, the first person they met was the Pro Hero 13, who gives them a speech telling them that they have impressive quirks, and they could save many lives, but the opposite is also true, so if they aren't careful they could kill many people. Then they begin to walk into the USJ, and when the doors were closed, the lights began to flicker on and off, and after a couple of seconds, the portal opens up in the plaza, and the first people to walk out was a guy with a hand mask, a giant bird monster, and a person who seemed to have created the portal, since his body was covered with the portal's energy. Then dozens of villains began to walk out, and when they all walked out, the portal closed behind them. Then when Eraser sees this, he tells 13 to get the students out of the USJ, then he runs straight at the group of villains. So the students tried to run to the front doors, but before they could leave, the portal villain flew straight at them, and he seemed to be able to stretch himself to the point where he surrounded the whole class. He then talks about how he is a member of the League of Villains, and that their objective is to kill All Might. He was going to continue talking, but he gets interrupted by Bakugo, Kirishima, and Izuku, who try to attack him, but when they try to attack, their attacks just went through him. Then the villain teleports the students to random locations in the USJ, and when Izuku was able to open his eyes, he found himself underwater. And seeing this, Izuku tried to get to the surface as fast as he could, because where he wasn't able to use any of his bending. But before he was able to get to the surface, Izuku noticed a shark-looking person, and before he was able to do anything to protect himself, the shark-looking person swam at him, and he was about to bite him, but before he could, Sue landed on top of his head, and she jumped on him, launching the villain a couple of feet down. Sue then grabbed Izuku and she brought him onto a nearby ship. Then Sue left to go find any of their other classmates, and after a couple of minutes, she came back with no one. Then the two tell each other about their quirks, and after about a minute, they come up with a plan, and when they were about to move, a villain began to manipulate the water, forming a giant hand, which was about to hit the boat, so Izuku quickly got on top of Sue's back. And when Sue was ready, she jumped as high as she could, but when the hand hit the boat, it destroyed it in one hit. But luckily, they were able to avoid it just in time. And when they began to lose height, Izuku focused his flames to his hands, and he shot out a wave of flames just strong enough to launch them into the air a bit higher for a couple of seconds. But those couple of seconds were just enough so the two were able to make it to the plaza. And when they get to shore, they see Aizawa with his head first on the ground, with his head being held by the bird monster, while the hand guy is watching. But before anything else could happen, the shadow villain went to the guy with the hand mask, and from what Izuku saw, he believes that something bad must have happened in the villain's plan, since the hand mask villain seemed very upset, and while he was having a temper tantrum, he turned his head and he saw Sue. Then before Sue could react, the hand villain ran to her, and he tried to reach his hand to touch her head, but before he could touch her, Izuku bended the ground near her, and he created a wall, which when Shigaraki touched it, it broke. The masked villain then looked at Izuku and he tried to attack him, but again, Izuku created a wall, and when it broke, Izuku did a punch with a small explosion at the end of his fist, which made Shigaraki back up. Then Shigaraki called for Nomu to take out the trash, and he pointed at Izuku. Then the bird monster let go of Aizawa's head, and he appeared in front of Izuku in a second. And seeing this, Izuku tried to launch a wave of flames at the monster, but even though it was burned, it healed after a couple of seconds. And seeing that Izuku was going to be attacked, Sue tries to help, but she gets swatted away by the monster, and she lands a couple of feet away. Then the monster picked up Izuku by the arm, and he slammed Izuku onto the ground, making Izuku land on his back, and that made Izuku feel the pain throughout his entire body, which made him want to pass out, but Izuku stayed awake. Izuku then tried to bend the ground around him to make a shield around himself, but after a couple of punches, the monster was able to break the shield Izuku made, and he grabbed Izuku by his head. Then the monster punched Izuku in the gut, and it was just enough to knock Izuku out. The masked villain then laughed, and he told Nomu to finish the kid, but before Nomu could move, Izuku opened his eyes, and his eyes gleamed a bright light. Izuku then began to rise into the air, and seeing this, Shigaraki told Nomu to quickly finish up Izuku, so Nomu ran at Izuku, but before he was able to reach Izuku, Izuku shot out a wave of air, which flung Nomu into the water, and when Nomu was in the water, Izuku froze it, freezing Nomu down. Izuku then bended the rocks up, and he condensed them into many small, sharp fragments, which flew around Izuku. Then Izuku began to shoot them out at Shigaraki, which Kurogiri protected him by creating a portal in front of Shigaraki, and he tried to fling the projectiles back at Izuku, but when they were about to hit him, Izuku put them back into the ground. Then Izuku began to move the air around him, and he was able to create a tornado around himself, which made everyone have to back away from Izuku, or they would have been sucked up. Then Izuku woke up, but when he looked down, he saw himself in the Avatar state, and he saw what was going on around him. But before he could do anything, he saw someone with an arrow on their head, and a giant bison with a similar looking arrow, and he told Izuku to get on, and for some reason, Izuku felt like he had seen that person before, so he gets on without asking any questions. But after he got on, he asked what was he doing, and what was the version of him down there that was attacking everyone. Then the bison flew through the roof of the USJ, and they flew into the clouds, and in the clouds, the man told Izuku that he was the Avatar, and he was told that he was able to bend all 4 elements. He also tells Izuku about the Avatar state, and how it's him at his strongest and weakest, and when the man was done talking, he brought the bison back down to Izuku's body, and he wishes Izuku luck, but right before Izuku went back into his body, he tells Izuku if he wants to see him again, just calm down and meditate. Then Izuku went back into his body, and when he woke up, he was in a crater with a bunch of rocks and dust everywhere, and everyone around him seemed to be injured to some extent, with the hand villain having multiple burn marks on his arms and legs, and the shadow villain seemed to be fine, since only his neck brace was damaged, but he was on the ground and he seemed tired, and the Nomu was frozen in the ice, deep in the water around 5 feet below, and it was also impaled with many sharp rock fragments in its stomach, and it was slowly breaking out of the ice, and Sue was still on the ground a couple of feet away. But before Izuku could do anything, the doors of the USJ burst open, and what the group sees is All Might, who rushes to the plaza, and he picks up Izuku, Sue, and Aizawa, and he brings them a couple of feet away, and he tells Izuku to get the 2 out of the way, and even though Izuku was tired and beaten up, he was able to slowly move the 2 towards the exit. Then All Might runs at the villain, and he tells him that they are done, since he is there. Then he shouts how dare they attack his students. Then Shigaraki told him that at this point they were the victims, since that kid did more harm than the both of them. Then before anything else could be said, Nomu was finally able to burst out of the ice, and seeing this, Shigaraki told Nomu to attack All Might, so Nomu ran at All Might and the 2 began to clash, with them just punching each other. And since Kurogiri was tired from having to deal with Izuku in the Avatar state, he doesn't even try to help Nomu, since he wants to make sure he has enough power to teleport the 2 away. So the fight between Nomu and All Might goes faster, and after around 299 punches, Nomu got flung into the air, and with one final punch with all of his energy, All Might launches the Nomu through the roof of the USJ, and after that final punch, All Might was unable to move, so he tries to tell Shigaraki that he's done for. And when he says this, Shigaraki told Kurogiri to get them out of there, so Kurogiri created a portal just big enough so they could escape. And right before Shigaraki left, he told All Might that the League of Villain will come back to get him and the kid that caused this to go terribly wrong. And a couple of minutes later, the teachers of UA show up with Ida, and they help the students that are still fighting villains. And after everything was done, Izuku was taken to recover a girl to heal. And while he was getting healed, Izuku kept on thinking what would have happened if he didn't get control of himself sooner. And before he could actually finish this line of thought, All Might walks into the room and he talks to Izuku, and he asks what happened during the attack. And after a bit of time, All Might asks Izuku if his eyes glowed again, and Izuku nodded. And he told Izuku that he really needs to get whatever that glowing thing is under control. And in response, Izuku tells All Might what he saw when he was in the Avatar state. And hearing all of this, All Might believes that this is something like One for All. So he asks Izuku if he's willing to let him help him by letting him train him. And this is where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.